Hello and welcome.
Promethea is a 32-issue series, entirely written by Alan Moore and illustrated by J.H. Williams III, with inks by Mick Gray. It was published by America's Best Comics, Alan Moore's own imprint through Wildstorm Studios, between 1999 and 2005. The beginning of Promethea starts with Rob Liefeld's Awesome Comics sometime in 1998. Following his run on Supreme and the miniseries Judgment Day, Alan Moore proposed changes for the characters of Glory and Prophet and the teen book Youngblood. The reinvention of Glory began in the final issue of Judgment Day. The story was intended to continue in a new, ongoing series. The changes Moore proposed and production sketches by Alex Ross were published in Awesome Universe Handbook in 1999. Unfortunately, Awesome Comics went out of business shortly thereafter. However, Moore had produced scripts for the series prior to Awesome being shuttered, and these scripts would eventually be illustrated and published by Avatar Press in 2001. While the published issues are mostly forgettable, what's interesting about Glory is it's a very straightforward, toned-down version of what would become Promethea. Actually, to be accurate, it's a melding of Promethea and Wonder Woman. There's also a small stylistic touch taken from Supreme, which is presented in the past of Glory being represented as old-style comics. The similarities are quite notable, such as the inclusion of an immaterial plane and the Tree of Life from the Kabbalah. Minor touches include the extensive past of Glory, which is more Wonder Woman than anything, and a talking bracer. The bracer being reminiscent of Promethea's caduceus, which is also sentient and speaks. While there are some distinct similarities, the execution of the stories are entirely different. Regardless, it would be difficult to overlook the connections between the two works and to not acknowledge one definitely influenced the other. As a side note, according to Rob Liefeld, the Prophet proposal, which doesn't appear to be publicly available, allegedly became the basis for Tom Strong. Tom Strong is Supreme, mixed with his Prophet proposal. Promethea is Glory. Simply put, there is no America's Best Comics without Supreme and the Awesome relaunch. Just for clarity, aspects of this series will be discussed at length, so if you're unfamiliar with the story, you may want to return at a later time. The story involves the college student Sophie Bangs, who writes a paper about a recurring, obscure character, Promethea. As a result of her investigation, Sophie becomes the latest iteration of Promethea. Being newly awakened, she faces various challenges from those that oppose her existence. Through the course of the series, she discovers the nature of her abilities and her true purpose, to bring about the apocalypse. The apocalypse, for the purposes of this story, isn't the end of everything. It's a new awareness, where the material world and the immaterial plane merge in a fictional space. Briefly, it's a new perception of reality. And, unlike most apocalyptic fiction, it contains no nihilism whatsoever. If one is overly reductive or dismissive, the message is simply one of peace, love, and understanding, which sounds like a quaint artifact from 60s counterculture. In this context, Promethea could be seen as the comic book equivalent of the song Age of Aquarius, although Alan Moore is more Elvis Costello than Fifth Dimension. This apocalypse is situated between and bears a thematic similarity to the grounded reality established in Miracle Man and the wild psychedelic reality of Providence. They are, in essence, utopian in nature. They are all brave new worlds with varying degrees of relatability. Promethea is both a story and a series of thinly disguised lectures, or a guidebook, one could say. Mostly, it's an examination of the immaterial world. It's about imagination and magic and how the two possibly correlate. Basically, it attempts to rationalize the irrational planes of existence for a general audience. Those predisposed to magical thinking might find it an interesting thesis, with points worth examining and discussing. For others, it may be a good series of ideas wrapped in a reasonably coherent apocalyptic story. One's level of enjoyment might be dependent on whether they enjoy a deep, ponderous examination of a very metaphysical subject or not. It's definitely not a casual reading experience. It very intentionally asks one to pay attention and follow the logic in an inherently illogical space, the imagination. One can't passively engage with the material. It requires active participation. As a work of fiction, it has some very lovely elements. The Weeping Gorilla, the Five Swell Guys, Elastigel, the multiple historical versions of Promethea, the multiple personality mayor, and the porn star mayor that replaces him. And there is the very cheeky text boxes, texture. This is what all of these elements are, texture. They fill out and inhabit the world of Promethea. Furthermore, each element has its own storyline that naturally intersects with Promethea's overall story. Like with Watchmen, everything is there to complement the main story. As an example of writing craft, it is a thing of beauty. All of these elements are concise and well balanced within the main narrative. In my opinion, it's practically flawless. Then there's the metatextual character, Promethea. In this work of fiction, she is a work of fiction. Her ability to manifest requires knowledge of her and a belief in her. Conceptually, it's a very postmodern take on the superhero concept. Her history is deep but obscure, and Alan Moore does a very good job of presenting the actual history of Promethea with the fictional interpretation of Promethea that he's crafted. Promethea is the female interpretation of the mythological Greek figure, Prometheus. Briefly, Prometheus created human life, gave it knowledge, as symbolized by fire, and inspired civilization. Overall, arts and science are attributed to Prometheus. Promethea is an extension of this basic interpretation. Her fire, the knowledge she passes along, comes in the form of full awareness of the immaterial plane and its manifestation in the imagination. There's also the elements of science and the supernatural being contrasted with one another. Well, in actuality, it's the contrast between science fiction and supernatural fiction, all of which is explored within a metafictional narrative, and, well, that's more than a few levels of interpretation to work through. There is the fictional, real world of Promethea, which is science-based and populated by many different forms of technology. Then there is the immaterial plane that's populated by metaphors and symbols and where anything is possible. To boil this comparison down to its essence, the story suggests that science is somewhat limiting because it's based on the properties of the material world. The immaterial world has no such limitations. Each level has its own distinct, allegorical, or metaphorical properties, but it is malleable to the imagination of those within its plane of influence. As a side note, Weeping Gorilla was allegedly inspired by a Mark Waid column from Secret Origins. In that column, Waid discussed the elements that make a comic a sales success. A gorilla, the color purple, and the hero crying on the cover were three of the mentioned elements, as were dinosaurs, an unanswered question, fire, and motorcycles. Moore apparently combined the first three factors to create a marketable icon of pop culture. As an element, it's a critique of insipid, surface-level observations of modern life. It's sarcasm expressed with sincerity. In the same vein are the texture boxes, which spit out rumor posed as fact, devoid of any insight. Both are lovely in their subtlety. Also, the Weeping Gorilla did make appearances in other ABC titles. It was a good recurring joke throughout the imprint. It's difficult to overlook and to not acknowledge the artistic contribution of J.H. Williams. His artwork is stunning and amazingly appropriate for the material. There is a fluidity of styles and an organic representation of symbols that is simply marvelous. The manner in which he designs the page to intuitively flow, despite the abundance of text and the highly detailed imagery, is a mastery that is majestic. While no one other than Alan Moore could have written this series, Williams is the only artist that could have illustrated it. Certainly, Williams wasn't the first choice, but any other option is unimaginable when one looks at the final result. Promethea is as much his as it is Moore's. His contribution is integral to the material. In my opinion, his work on Promethea may only be surpassed by his work on Batwoman, which contains a creative passion for the character that is unmistakable. Williams seems to favor the two-page layout, leaving abundant space in the middle to accommodate the staples in the printed copy. Digitally, the grandeur of these pages comes alive. This may make me sound like a heretic, but to fully appreciate the scope of the artwork, it's best viewed on a computer monitor at full screen. The artwork is seamless and uninterrupted by the physical properties on the printed page. Quite simply, it views much better than its printed counterpart. The journey in Promethea is, in essence, Alan Moore's philosophical wonderings about the nature of imagination and its potential connection to magic. This is a topic that many have tackled in the past. due to the mind's seemingly ineffable ability to construct abstractions. Like a hidden corner of reality, it feels like an area of existence that needs explanation. For some, the mind may be an artifact of the memory process. It has a physical cause that, at this point, is difficult to render into a working theory. To others, the mind is another hypothetical frontier. It's a level of existence beyond the physical, with properties waiting to be explored. Finally, others enjoy the mystery the mind represents. An explanation, any explanation, feels unsatisfactory. Once explained, it becomes ordinary, less romantic. It's no longer a tantalizing, inexplicable, and solely intimate experience. It becomes a physical process, or a metaphysical system of symbols and interpretation. Ultimately, Promethea is putting forth a belief system, and a mechanism whereby those beliefs are justifiable. Like any belief system, it requires a level of faith in the validity of the evidence or the arguments that support those beliefs. As for the significance of the various symbols and metaphors and such, that's all presented in the pages of Promethea. The final issue in specific is a summary of the thesis, so to speak. Examining these elements would simply be reiterating what's already in the comic book. Philosophically, there's a fair amount to interpret and critique. Symbolically, it's all laid out in plain language. In the end, Promethea is a rhetorical work that some might claim leans towards self-indulgence. The narrative is slowed to a crawl at points to explore representations and to build the argument Moore is putting forth. At that point, characters become mouthpieces. The transition between narrative and argument is mostly smooth, but it's a transition one can't help but notice, even if that recognition is on an intuitive level. At the same time, it's a beautiful presentation. Promethea is a self-aware, fictional character, uncovering the secrets of her existence in a fictional realm. Her journey is universal, literally and metaphorically. She travels beyond the outer limits of perception, so she can bring the fire of understanding into existence. Her awareness becomes our awareness. That's it for today. Like, subscribe, and comment, and I will talk at you later. Until next time.